Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, we have a very special guest for you today, Dr. Loren Fishman. Dr. Loren Fishman is the medical director of the Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation in New York City. He's the author of 10 books and more than 90 academic articles, and a world-recognized pioneer in the use of yoga in medical conditions. You can find out more about Dr. Loren Fishman and his wonderful work at his website, sciatica.org. Welcome, Dr. Fishman.
Hello.
So I had the great privilege studying with Dr. Loren Fishman recently and getting certified in yoga for osteoporosis. And at age 62, I still teach yoga 8 times a week. And while I was studying with Dr. Fishman, one of the things that really struck me, and then his many incredibly insightful comments, he said, the happiest he ever is when he's either teaching or practicing yoga. And I just love that comment. So, Dr. Fishman, how do you use yoga in your medical practice?
I use it in many ways, Catherine. There's not a single way. I use it for osteoporosis, as you mentioned. I use it a lot in lower back pain. I've written a lot and done a lot of research on yoga for scoliosis, which works, and yoga for rotator cuff syndrome, one of the most common ailments of the shoulder. But I use it for other things too. There's yoga for insomnia. There's yoga for weight loss, which not only works, it also sustains the loss that you acquire. You don't yo-yo up and down the way you do with the diets and the medicines and almost anything else. And there's yoga for something called restless leg syndrome, which also works extremely well. So I've used yoga in many ways. I've used it for hernias. It doesn't cure the hernia, but it controls the symptoms until you do something that is more definitive.
Now, Dr. Fishman, is it okay if I brag on you a little bit for our audience and ask you, how old are you?
I'm 80. I'm going to be 81 next week.
That's incredible. And how many times a week do you personally practice yoga?
Every day.
Every day.
I never miss a day. I mean, that's been going on for probably 50 years. When I was in medical school, sometimes I was on call. And so I was running around all night. Then you know what I would do? I would do it twice the next day.
Now, I know that you had the great privilege of studying with the yoga master BKS Iyengar, who's often considered the father of modern yoga. And so will you share for us, at age 81, what does your personal yoga practice look like these days?
It looks as much like Mr. Iyengar's as I could make it, which isn't too close, actually. Not only was he a masterful teacher, highly intelligent, generous, rational man, a well-formed individual. I mean, inside as well as outside. But he was a master of performing yoga. He invented many of these asana or refined them from what they'd been before. And I do the best I can. I spend anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half doing physical hatha yoga. And then, of course, I meditate every day too, at least once, twice, whenever possible.
And I understand Mr. Iyengar, didn't he practice yoga, the postures, about 4 to 6 hours every day?
I don't think it was that much when he was older. Most of his practice, I think, was part of teaching, though he did his own yoga. One morning when I was in India, he smiled at me and said, I did 108 back bends before I came here. And that means back bend with a flip, a pose called Urdhva Dhanurasana, where you then jump over and bring your feet back on the floor the other way around.
I have to say, I've never done a backflip myself. I've done full wheel, but I've never done the backflip with it.
Flip afterwards. If you like, I'll show you sometime. The idea is to get your chest over your hands. And that's how you can, if your chest isn't over your hands, you don't have a chance.
So let's share for our audience a little bit about yoga for osteoporosis. So first of all, Dr. Fishman, how prevalent is osteoporosis and osteopenia in Western culture these days?
Well, I'll just give you the American statistics, which I trust and which are relatively up to date. 55 million people, that's out of about 330 million altogether. So it's about 1/6 of the population has either osteopenia or osteoporosis. Of that 55 million, about 10 million have actual osteoporosis, and the other 45 million have osteopenia. In the world, it is said that there are over 200 million people that have osteoporosis. I believe that's probably true, but I think the statistics vary in their acuity according to the region that you're discussing.
Now, you have come up with a series of 12 yoga postures that you have done. Scientific medical research shows that reverses osteoporosis and osteopenia. So for our audience, many of whom may be practicing yoga already, what are these 12 poses in your original first series?
Well, I could go over them one by one. Is that what you want me to do?
If you'll just list it out for our audience.
Oh,
The
okay.
12 poses.
You can also see them in many places. It's on YouTube for free. I put it there years ago. We have DVDs that we actually will send you if you want. But here's what the poses are. We start out with the tree, Vrikshasana, where your hands go over your head like this, your biceps behind yours, and you stretch up and dig your fingertips into the ceiling. I won't give so much of a description of all of them. Then we do the triangle, a simple pose, straightforward. I should say, all the poses come in 3 versions. There's the beginner version for just about anybody and people who are frightened or mildly disabled in a variety of ways. Then an intermediate version that's a bridge from the beginning version to the classical pose. And what we don't really know is whether people can actually get better, more better, using these earlier versions. Once in a while, I look at the earlier version, I say, this is actually better than the classical version vis-a-vis bone growth, bone strengthening. I'm not sure. All I know is that they all work. If you do them all, you get better. About 83% of the people get better. So where were we? There's the tree, Vrikshasana, where you bring your arms over your head. There's the triangle. There's the, it's warrior 2. It's the Sanskrit is Virabhadrasana, the second warrior. There are 3, not the first one, not the third one, the second warrior. Then there's the side angle pose, Parsvakonasana. Then there's Parivrita Trikonasana, the twisted triangle, which in my suspicions is the one that is the best of all of them. If I were going to a desert island and I could only take one pose with me, that's the one I'd take. Then there's Shalabhasana, the locust. Then there's Setubandhasana, the bridge. Then there's Suptapadangustasana, where you're lying on the floor and you bring one leg way up. And then there's Suptapadangustasana 2, where you bring your leg way out to the side like that. Then there's Marishasana, a twist. Then there's Matsyendrasana, a twist with both legs folded. And finally, Shavasana, the corpse pose, which may sound easy, but which Mr. Iyengar says is the most difficult pose of all, because the mind is a wild animal and it must be tamed in that pose.
So you've done scientific research that shows that these 12 yoga poses, if you practice them regularly, will reverse osteopenia and osteoporosis. So for our audience, how often do they need to do this sequence of these 12 poses, and how long do they need to hold the poses?
Well, in what we originally did is I did a pilot study, which to my great surprise worked. I just did it because my friends said, what, you're going to do osteoporosis? You're going to do yoga on people with osteoporosis? You're going to break their bones. And I said, maybe they're right. So I did a pilot study. I invited people to my office every day for once a week for 2 years after I was done seeing patients. And we taught them yoga once a week for 2 years, and I divided them into two. Oh, I had about 200 patients on that either had osteopenia or osteoporosis. So one group, they just went on and didn't do anything with them. The other group, we gave them these yoga lessons every week. We asked them to do it every day. At the end of 2 years, I was looking at the data. There were no injuries, by the way, no herniated discs, nothing. And certainly no fractures. And my son, one of my kids, was walking by my desk and he said, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm looking at this data from this study that I'm doing, this pilot study." He said, "Are you going to publish it?" I said, "No, it's not going to be statistically significant. There weren't enough patients, you know." He said, "Give me the data, Dad." I gave him the data. He went upstairs, came 5 minutes later, he came back down. He said, "Dad, it's significant." So I published the paper. I got fire in my belly. I got all excited. I made 1,000 DVDs and I just gave them away to people who said they wanted to do the yoga and were willing to do tests, blood tests and a urine test to rule out metabolic, hereditary and nutritional factors, which I didn't think the yoga would cover. And then got in the data. And out of the 1,000 discs, we ended up with, I think it was 241 people who actually did this pose at least 4 times a week. 4 times a week, 5 times a week, 6 times a week, or 7 times a week. Those are the patients who we looked at. So that's your answer, 4 times a week. And 83% of them gained bone. They didn't all gain bone, and I'm interested to see why that 17% didn't. And I've got some answers. One answer is that people try to give doctors what they want to hear. So they said they did it 4 times a week. They actually did it 4 times a month. You know, people tend to exaggerate their participation in a study. But there are some that it really, I'm convinced, did it and it didn't help. I don't know the reasons for that.
No, I heard about your wonderful research years ago in my 50s, and it totally changed the way that I had been teaching yoga, because many people, when they teach yoga, they only hold the yoga poses for a short period of time, say maybe 5 breaths. And my understanding, your research shows that you have to hold the yoga poses at least 12 seconds, up to 72 seconds to stimulate the bone growth.
No, that's not my research, Catherine. That's just other obsessive compulsive researchers who actually timed it in a Petri dish. And so I'm putting stress on the little bone cells and seeing when they came forth with the proteins that gather potassium and calcium and phosphorus and make bone. And the answer was, before 12 seconds, they don't do it. And after 72 seconds, they enter a refractory period. They're too pooped to pop and they can't do it either. In the meantime, they do it. And, you know, Catherine, to tell you the truth, this is a natural process, like the tides coming in. One wave is bigger and one wave is smaller, but overall, there is a tendency for either to come in or go out. And I mean, it's not like there's a referee in there blowing a whistle and saying, "Okay, it's 12 seconds, now you start." Probably it's a bell-shaped curve, and some of the cells start at 12 seconds, some start at 8, some start at 16, you know, and some quit at 70, some quit at 75. The average probably is 72. Those are the results. But I ask people to hold them at least 30 seconds. I suppose if it's a normal distribution, the right answer would be 36 seconds, which would be half of 72. And that would be when most of the cells were doing their maximum.
Okay, fascinating. And then also I understand with your original series of 12 yoga poses, you can do them in any order, right? So you could start with your hamstring stretch and then do tree or what have you, correct?
Well, that is true. I follow my great teacher, Mr. Iyengar, in putting the poses in the order I put them, because yoga kind of warms you up for its more difficult poses. And were you to start with the twisted triangle, I'm not sure you'd have this pristine record that we have of 0 injuries. You know, no fractures, no discs, no knee problems, nothing of a serious nature, no meniscal tears. I think the order that the first series is in has proven itself to be a safe order. I think in terms of building bone, if you could look at that in the abstract, which of course you cannot because we're people, but were you able to look at it in a pure way, any order would be just as good. Yes.
Now, you're a medical doctor and you're very familiar with the research about medications for osteopenia and osteoporosis. What's the problem with taking drugs for osteoporosis and osteopenia?
There are a number of problems. One is their side effects. Most of them have side effects which are really dastardly and drastic, you know. For example, the bisphosphonates, Fosamax, and I don't know what their names are in all the countries of the world, but they're all bisphosphonates. These are the most popular ones today. One of them is even injected now. And there's another one that is almost that way. Denosumab is its chemical name. What they do, I'll explain it a little bit. You know, the physiology of bone is really pretty straightforward. There are the cells that lay down new bone, the osteoblasts, and they're the cells that pick up bone and dissolve it and return its elements to the systemic circulation. So it's a give and take situation. And what those medicines do, and most of the medicines do, is they keep the cells making bone, they don't touch them, but they limit the cells that are eating up the bone and returning the elements back into the bloodstream. So you think of it like your bank account. You're making the same amount of money and you're spending less. So what's going to happen? You end up with more money in the bank. So if you're making more bone, making the same amount of bone and reabsorbing less, you're going to end up with more bone, right? Right. But where the money is fungible and absolutely the same, the bone you get that way isn't. And here's why. First, nature didn't put those reabsorbing cells there because she didn't know what else to do with them. There's a reason that they're there. The reason they're there is that bone cells get sick, get diseased, damaged, and they die. And these cells are really like janitors. They're eating up cells that are in some amount of trouble and laying down a marker so that a new cell will be created there. And there are reasons that, maybe I can explain it. Bone can't have that many veins and arteries in it. If it were to have that many, it wouldn't be that strong. So there's an artery, and then there are many cells arrayed around it. Now, the cells right next to the bone are going to get, right next to the blood vessel are going to get oxygen, glucose, protein, hormones, all the things that cells need right directly. But what about the cell out here that is 4 cells away from that one? Well, that's nature's wonder. These cells, they look like Portuguese men of war with long tentacles hanging down, and they connect one cell to the next. So this little cell at the middle takes on enough oxygen, glucose, and so on for itself, and also takes in a lot more, which it gives to the next cell. And the next cell does the same thing, and the next cell does this. And these Congo lines can be 11 cells long. Well, suppose cell number 2 gets sick and dies. All the rest of those cells are now bereft, not only of everything they need to survive, but also a way of getting rid of the products of metabolism, which are quite toxic. So what happens? This cell dies, and all the cells along the line die. And so with fewer cells eating up the one that's the first one that died and putting a new one in there, whole sheets of cells die. So you get spontaneous fractures. You get osteonecrosis, most commonly in the jaw, but I've seen 3 cases in the knee. I've seen one in the femur. I mean, this happens. These medicines, if you take them orally, are gastrically, utterly impossible. You have to stand for an hour. And 2 other things wrong with them. I mean, they work. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they don't work. They don't always work, but they generally do work. And there's a correlation between how they work and the limitation of fractures, which I'll describe in a minute. But when it comes to using them, one thing that's wrong is that, to tell you the truth, bone mineral density, what they measure in the DEXA scan, is not the last word in bone strength. If this were a bone, the bone mineral density is all around the periphery. It's just in the circumference of the bone. So what goes on in the middle? There are cross struts, they're called trabeculae, reinforcements that go every which way inside. They're like fingerprints. Everybody has their own pattern, but they all reinforce the strength of the bone. How much? anywhere between 30 and 70% of the strength of the bone is contained in the arrangement and strength of these trabeculae. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that the DEXA scan measures something very, very important, but it doesn't measure it all. Sometimes it doesn't even measure half of what makes up the strength of the bone. What do I mean by strength of the bone? It's resistance to fracture.
So
wait, I'm sorry, I'm so long-winded.
Please go ahead, please. This is so important.
When it comes to these trabeculae, 30 to 70% of the strength of the bone, when it comes to them, the DEXA scan doesn't measure them at all. And when it comes to the medicines, like the bisphosphonates, there are several reports out there that say it weakens these. It strengthens this, but it weakens these. Others reports say it doesn't strengthen them anyway. So it's limited. Now, the last thing I want to say about what's wrong with the medicines, although I repeat, they work. They will build your bone mineral density, and that does reduce your chance of fracture. I mean, I'm trying to tell you the truth here. But the other thing wrong with them is that you can only take them for so long. And while you have a rise in your bone mineral density while you're taking them, when you stop, there is a precipitous decline. Do you decline back to where you were before you took the medicine in the first place? No. But do you decline? Yes. And what do you do then? After that, it's a much more gradual decline if you don't take any medicines. What do you do then? You take another one, which also has a limited time span over which you can safely administer it to yourself. So these are all the things wrong with them. Now, maybe you want to ask me what's wrong and what's good about yoga, but I don't know.
All right, now we're going to have a wonderful word from one of our sponsors. So hang in there with us, and we'll be right back as we hear from our sponsors. Dr. Loren Fishman, you are a world-leading expert on yoga for osteoporosis. And many people will argue that all kinds of exercise helps you build bone. Why is yoga uniquely beneficial for building bone?
I'm not sure it's uniquely beneficial. There may be something else that's better that we don't know about. And also, there may be better yoga poses. I've found 12 that definitely work. Does that mean they're the only ones that work, or that they're the ones that work the best? I cannot answer that one way or the other, because I don't know. But what's good about yoga is that, first, it keeps you in the position for 30 seconds, 45 seconds is what you choose. And that's enough to surpass the minimum requirements for building bone, which is, many experts say, 12 seconds. So that's good, whereas weightlifting doesn't generally do that. Secondly, there are very few injuries in yoga. Weightlifting has a lot of injuries. Even golf has more injuries than yoga, many more. Third, you can do it at home alone on your own. It doesn't cost you anything. So from a public health standpoint, I mean, what we're dealing with here is a public health emergency in the building. A wonderful researcher, Ethel Cyrus at Columbia, did a study in which she looked at the 112,000 new recipients of Medicare who also had Part D, which means that their drugs were free. And of that 112,000 people with Medicare Part D and osteoporosis, how many do you think even bought the medicines, even went to the store and got the medicines? Less than 1/3, more like 1/4. And you know, the population is aging. So anybody who's got osteoporosis is going to be counted for a lot of years. And a hip fracture and all these things, not only are they expensive and trouble, they're painful. And 1/4 of the people that have a hip fracture die. Another quarter enter a nursing home from which they will not emerge. And 50% return to their normal lives. So yoga being free, we haven't talked yet about the side effects of yoga, but being easy to get, you don't have to go to the pharmacy, you don't need insurance. fact, I saw an English woman with a t-shirt that said, "Yoga is my health insurance." I really like that. The premiums are low. So that's another advantage to yoga and a reason you should do it. But perhaps the biggest advantages are that almost all the fractures from osteoporosis occur because of lousy posture or a fall. Yoga is good for your posture, improves your balance, improves your strength, your range of motion, your coordination, lowers your anxiety, and therefore mitigates against the risk of a fall. Every one of them. No medicine that the doctor rolls across, we roll across our desks, no medicine can make that claim. Oh, but you say, but there are medicines that reduce your anxiety. Yeah, but they impair your balance. So that's another reason yoga is good. And then the final reason I'm going to give you, I mean, there probably are more, but anyway, the last reason is that you can do it forever. You don't have to quit after 5 or 7 years. And so far as we can tell, I mean, we've had some people in our studies for 6 years. The effect of yoga is not diminished after that time. I mean, it's conceivable that it would sprint and help you for 2 years and then sort of level off. It doesn't, as far as we can tell.
Now, Dr. Fishman, you know about the research on osteoporosis, and I have to share with our audience, all this comes very close to home for me because I got certified in yoga for osteoporosis with Dr. Fishman, and I shared that information with a lady who practices yoga with my mother, and in Savannah. And then about a month later, my 84-year-old mother, who has osteoporosis, fell and broke her wrist in 3 places. So the pain that you go through when you break a bone, especially as you are older, or really at any age, is really astounding. And I went and I spent 2 weeks helping my mother after this incredibly painful injury. So, one of the things that I talk to people about is choose your heart. It's really hard and painful to break bones. It may be hard to develop self-discipline to take care of yourself, but choose your heart. So, final question before we take another break, Dr. Fishman. What are the most commonly broken bones in osteoporosis? So if somebody has osteoporosis, what are the bones they're most likely to break?
The most common one is the spine. And the spine you can get a fracture there. Here, I just happen to have a vertebrae here with me. This is probably from a giraffe. It's quite large. You can see compared to my head, it's not, it's big. And the part that fractures is almost invariably the same. It's right up here at the front of the vertebra. If this were a giraffe or a human, facing this way. So it's the very front of the vertebra. And the fractures occur right here. They're called wedge fractures sometimes because they depress the anterior surface so that instead of the top and the bottom being parallel, the top is now declining downward. So it looks sort of like a wedge. And if you have one, then your spine is inclined forward. There's more pressure on the one above it. You're more likely yet to have the second one, and so on for the third. So that's the most common. And posture and falls are the 2 causes there. For all the others, posture does not seem relevant. The second most common is the hip. And that's the worst fracture, the femur. That's the one where 25% of the people die. Third most common, the wrists. Fourth most common, the ribs. So it goes like that. We've created 2 more series, one of which is devoted to the wrists and one of which is devoted to the ribs. But I want to say, if you have trouble with self-discipline in this, we at least give a class every Tuesday night, 5:30 Eastern Standard Time in the US, where for an hour we will do a class. And if you join our recent study, the class is free. So I wanted to say that because it's true. So now there's one fracture in the United States every 3 seconds.
Yeah.
The sound is deafening. Can you make it?
Yes, it's really astounding. And again, I just know from personal witnessing what my mother went through. And I was so thankful because she had been practicing twice a week. And, which is good. I always talk about good, better, best. Best
Oh,
is,
let me tell you a brief story. I mean, the way I started doing my first study, I didn't know what to do. Mr. Iyengar was his last time in the United States. He came and he gave a talk at the city center, an auditorium of about 3,000 people, maybe more. And I rented the back cover of the little libretto that went with it. And I put an ad in there saying, join my study for yoga for osteoporosis. And about a week later, I was looking at myself in the mirror and I said, Dr. Fishman, you're really not very smart, because you are trying to get people to do yoga to reverse osteoporosis who are already doing yoga and have osteoporosis. And that was true. And yet they persisted. They were all joining the study. So the odd thing was 6 years later, when they were all done and we analyzed all the data, those people who had been doing yoga and getting osteoporosis, when they did these 12 poses, the way we asked them to do them, they got better. So it's not just doing yoga, it's doing certain yoga. I can't claim that mine is the greatest, and for all time, but the ones I've developed do work.
very valuable information. And now let's have another word from our sponsors. So, Dr. Fishman, with your research on yoga for osteoporosis, if someone does these 12 poses at least 4 times a week, holding these poses for at least 30 seconds, is it absolutely necessary to take calcium supplements to help build bone, or is the yoga enough without having to take supplements?
No, you got to do some things. I mean, otherwise it's like you're building a house and you invite the electrician, the bricklayer, the carpenter, the plumber, invite them all there, but you don't deliver the bricks, the wood, and the pipes. You got to have the building blocks for doing it. Now, what isn't clear is how much calcium you have in your diet. If you have enough calcium in your diet, which is not very helpful to tell you, but it's true, then of course you don't need to take any extra calcium. Think of the animals, how they wander about in the forest and the jungles. They don't measure their calcium, and yet they have very good bones. Why? Because our intestines are very intelligent and they tell our brains what we should eat. They really do. Do they make mistakes? They do. But I advise just to cover it, 1,500 milligrams of calcium, 1,500 international units of vitamin D3, not just vitamin D, D3. I like 250 milligrams of magnesium. Generally, they can be harmful for your bowels. It can get them too active. So I like it when it's chelated, that's CHELATED, with an amino acid. And you can get that at any health food store just about, or it's online if you need to. And vitamin K2. I did not administer this during the study, but I do it now because I think it works. I know it works. 90 microcentigrams of K2, menaquinone, that one. So, and that seems to do the job very well. Now, if you're worried about getting too much calcium, you're right. The hot controversies about calcium. If you take 1,500 milligrams under age 75, you're pretty much in the clear. Your body will decide, these intelligent intestines you have, decide whether they need to take it in or just let it go by. They know. And above the age of 75, I would say 500 milligrams of calcium to avoid kidney stones and other things that really can happen. Some claim calcification of the aorta, which is not so funny.
Now, here we are on the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. If someone wanted to include bone building foods in their diet, what sort of bone building foods would you recommend they include?
Well, no, the famous old Danish saying, no one gets happy from loving, no one gets rich from saving, no one gets strong from eating. Not going to do it. A friend of mine, Ron Weiss, who is a strong proponent of the whole plant diet, was asked this question, and he said, there's nothing you can eat that'll build your bones. There are things you can fail to eat, which will definitely deteriorate, cause them to deteriorate. But you've got to do something to stress the bones to get that activity working. It's sort of like saying, what can you eat to become educated? Well, you got to eat. You're not going to get educated if you're starving to death, but you got to do something else. And so green leafy vegetables have a lot of calcium in them. Menadione is one of those things. Menaquinone comes, it's basically an animal product. I don't think there's very much in the plant world, but I recommend it anyway. And if you can't do it because you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you can't do it. Tigers have strong bones, but so do elephants. You don't have to eat meat to do it. You don't have to eat them. Magnesium is prevalent in many things. Nuts are good for magnesium too. And different nuts are better. I think Brazil nuts are particularly good, and pecans. When it comes to vitamin D3, I'm not sure you can get that in nature if you're a vegan or a vegetarian. But it comes from vitamin D2, which comes from vitamin D, which is in all kinds of fruits and vegetables. But there was a Hungarian study where they want to know how much sunlight do our adolescents need to get strong bones. So they did all the calculations. They're very smart about it. And they ended up saying they need 20 minutes in the winter, where the sun is not so available, 20 minutes of the noonday sun. There was only one problem. They did not figure out how to stop the sun at noon for 20 minutes.
Or if you live in some place like the UK, where
right, or Finland, yes, right, or the UK.
You're living on a latitude on the planet where there's certain seasons of the year where you're literally not going to get enough sunlight, or if it's cloudy and rainy all the time.
Right. Well, cheer up. I mean, if you live in the southern hemisphere, cheer up, because the hole in the ozone is getting bigger, so you're going to be okay. That's facetious. I don't really mean that at all. It's terrible. But right, stormy Scotland, what are you going to do? Well, my answer is vitamin D3, which the drug companies, you may love them, you may hate them, they've come up with this wonderful thing, D3. They do what the sun does to vitamin D2.
Awesome. Now, Dr. Fishman, what is the connection between our bone health and weight loss?
Huh, what a good question. Swedish research in the last couple of years, his name is John Olaf Jensen. We just say Jensen. Found, I won't tell you the whole study. It's an ingenious, wonderful study that he did on 2 different mammals. He thinks it's going to be true of all mammals, and I hope he's right. It turns out, just give you the conclusion. It's pretty strong, the research. Little cells in your legs measure how much you weigh by how much pressure is on them. And by a means that is not elucidated at this time, influence the appetite centers in your brain. So that if you remove those little sensors, which are osteoblasts and osteocytes, if you remove them, you get fatter and fatter and fatter. But if you keep them in there, they are almost exquisitely sensitive to how much you weigh. And those are the same cells that build bone. Nature is economical, and because those cells have to measure stress in order to decide where to put bone, nature gave them the job of determining how much we should weigh.
Now, that's fascinating. Now, I know when I studied with you recently, you made the astute observation, which I've also observed, that there are not many fat yoga practitioners. I mean, they're just like the general population. There are people who struggle with their weight of all professions.
Right.
In
the United States, there's been a great change. In 1960, 1 out of 3 people were overweight. In 2020, 2 out of 3 people were overweight. That's 2 out of every 3, 67%. Now, The interesting thing is when you go to a yoga class, maybe there's one person who's overweight, maybe two, once in a while three. That's about the most I've ever seen. However, this gravitostat, this mechanism that whereby the osteocytes in your legs determine how much you weigh, is not always accurate. But anyway, it's not always the overriding factor. And there are yogis who are overweight. Some of them, I taught a webinar last weekend, and there was a significantly overweight woman who was one of the best yogis and one of the best teachers there. So, I mean, the weight is one thing. But yoga, it's true, you don't see many overweight yogis, and that's true for a number of other reasons too. Yoga is one of the greatest known stimuli for what's called PGC1 alpha. And PGC1 alpha is the strongest stimulus for the mitochondria. Now, what are the mitochondria? They are the power stations in every cell in the body, in every cell on Earth, except a few that live near the sulfur fumes in the deep Pacific. Every creature on Earth has these mitochondria, and they are the ones that convert glucose into energy. Energy for what? For everything. For talking, for thinking, for smelling, for secreting hormones, for moving, for everything. So if you stimulate them strongly, you're going to burn more energy. You're going to burn more calories. You're going to be a more energetic person in the first place. Probably good for your hormones too, good for your endocrine system, probably good for everything. But they increase both in their number, they divide more frequently, and each one of the ones that is created has a higher level of activity due to PGC1 alpha. Now, another thing that's good about yoga is that yoga, whatever else it does, it stretches you. And they found out that one of the single strongest ways to inhibit your appetite centers is stretching your stomach, because embedded in the stomach, the layers of stomach mucosa are cells that sense whether your stomach is getting stretched. And when it's getting stretched, it sends signals to the nucleus solitarius, other places in the brain that are appetite centers, and inhibits them so you're less hungry. And a word of warning, that effect is 4 times stronger at noon than it is at midnight. So if you get up in the late at night and you go down to the refrigerator and you look around after a while, you say, oh my God, the refrigerator is empty. That's because your stomach didn't tell your brain, or didn't tell it very forcibly, to stop eating. At noon, you would never do that. Your stomach would be talking to your brain much earlier in the conversation. So it's a reason to link insomnia with overweight. And there is great yoga for insomnia too, by the way. I can recommend, I have a book called Healing Yoga, which I talk about being overweight. I talk about all these things. And it's been out about 2 years, probably you can get it online, I bet. You can get it at Amazon, that's for sure. And I think it has an electronic version to it too.
For sure. And Dr. Fishman's books are true resources of incredibly valuable information. The one that I just read was Yoga for Osteoporosis. Now, Dr. Fishman, going back to what you said, what is, for our audience, what is PGC1 alpha, and how does yoga uniquely stimulate PGC1 alpha?
It doesn't uniquely stimulate it. It's a very interesting chemical that is released from the muscles, and it's released with mild activity. Probably Tai Chi would do it. I say probably because I'm not sure. Sumo wrestling, being in the NBA, the NFL, that's not going to do it. Big time boxing, but gentle activity, maybe Feldenkrais, you could get it too. Certain forms of non-strenuous dancing could probably do it. And it's liberated, but it's liberated very reliably from this type of activity. Yoga is not unique, but yoga certainly does it. I should say one thing that is unique about yoga, almost unique about yoga, that I didn't mention. I asked myself, I wrote a book on using yoga to lose weight recently, Yoga for Weight Loss. And I was asking myself, what is the strongest thing to influence people? They've tried these diets, they've tried education, they try medicines. Nobody sticks to anything. The urge to eat is obviously a very basic one. If it weren't, that the creatures that didn't have that strong urge wouldn't be here now, and they aren't. It's a very strong urge. And when you get a powerful linkage of this great desire to eat. And on the other hand, marketing that says, we can get them to eat. We just have to figure out clever ways to entice them. These two form a mighty stream that we're all drawn down and we get fat. I said, well, what can we do that's stronger than that? And the only one I could come up with any reliability, was ideals. People will die for England. They'll die for Christianity. They'll die for their family. The family also, it's an idea. It's not a thing. Just a number of individuals, be they a religion or a country or a group with a single progenitor. And yoga is that type of thing. It's an ideal. You're dying for a principle. It's something attributed to Voltaire, which I don't think he really said. I think a woman said it in the 19th century. They don't want to give credit to the woman, so they give the credit to Voltaire. He said, or she said, I may not agree with what you say, but I will give my life for your right to say it. That's sort of freedom of speech. And I would give my life for that too. It's an abstract thing.
Well, Dr. Fishman, we'll definitely have to have you back to share your wonderful ideas on yoga for weight loss.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to put the capper on that one to say, yoga gives you an abstract interest in becoming a more liberated person. Mr. Iyengar, last time I saw him, sorry to go on like this, but I'm gonna. Last time I saw him, I was walking down from a podium where I'd given a little talk. And who did I see walking up the podium but Mr. Iyengar? It was a statistical miracle in India. 1.3 billion people, and there he was. I said to Mr. Iyengar, if this is the last time we meet, and there are 2,500 people in the audience, gigantic yawning airplane hangar full of people, well, like anybody. I said, well, if this were the last time we meet, what would you say to me? He saw me, he said, fish. I said, no, Fishman. And he said, to his everlasting credit, he didn't just come out with one of his innumerable quips. He thought about it for a second and he said, you only rent your body. Meaning, don't feel you can abuse it. It's not yours. It comes from the universe. It's not you. And that applies to weight loss too. You can't, don't feel it's yours to abuse. It isn't. That's what I wanted to say.
A very powerful message. You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been the wonderful expert, Dr. Loren Fishman, medical director of the Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation in New York City, author of 10 books. You can find out more about Dr. Fishman and his life-changing work at his website, sciatica.org. And remember, we're going to end with Mr. Iyengar's thought, you only rent your body. So take care of it. And yoga is a wonderful way to do that. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.